Hello and welcome to the video everyone. Thank you very much for watching. Today I'm going to be reading the comments that people posted on the jam, and fixing any bugs that they might report, as well as making a couple tweaks based on the information they give me. Let's look and see what our first commenter has to say.
Nice game. Not a huge fan of repeated clicks to move. Maybe hold click would be better. And for some reason I was not gaining any scrap when picking it up. But really cool concept. Well done.
Really good concept. The movement system can be improved. The art is really cute. After one death, the scrap counter stops working. Cute fun game. Nice work.
It seems that both players had very similar problems while playing the game. Let's start with the scrap counter. It seems that the problem was that the scrap counter was trying to not be destroyed at the end of the scene when the player dies and the new scene is loaded. Or in this case, reloaded. However, in the process of doing this, not all the relevant information and code was transferred to the new scene. So the old scene was destroying the display information but not updating the supply information. So the supplier and the display information for the scrap counter were not actually communicating. This resulted in the scrap counter always being 0 even if you had more than 0 scrap. Fortunately for me, it was relatively simple to fix this problem. All I needed to do was make it that the scrap counter would not be preserved when the new scene is loaded, and just make sure that the scene always has a scrap counter when the scene starts. In this way, it won't conflict and the scripts will always be able to communicate as they're supposed to. As for the complaints that the players had about the player movement, I've now updated it so that you can hold down the mouse button and the player will move to the last position that you were while holding down the mouse button, as opposed to having to constantly click in order to update where your player is going to. This makes things just overall easier and a lot cleaner while moving. So thank you very much for bringing it up. It really is a big improvement to the game. Even though there was technically nothing wrong with the player movement before, having it move like this is actually a lot better and a lot cleaner. So thank you guys very much for the recommendation.
Hey, I just finished your game, so I thought I'd give some feedback. I didn't dislike the idea of the movement, but because, or at least seemed like, it was tile-based, the character got stuck on wall and the enemies all the time. Also, the art was very good in some parts, and in others, it was just that black circle which really confused me. I played about 6 or 7 times, and on only one of the times did the first night not last forever. Also, my scrap counter was always at 0 no matter what. I liked the idea for the game, but it just isn't really playable.
You're probably running into this issue because I accidentally made the box colliders a little bit too big for what normally applies for games. I accidentally included the head and the upper body as parts of the box collider, which, as we've gotten used to through other games as well as just common sense, your head and your upper torso should normally be able to move in front of objects in the game scene. So I've adjusted the box collider so that it's just below the torso. This way you can move in front of walls and you aren't as likely to get hooked on things, as well as made the enemy's box collider ever so slightly smaller so that it's easy enough to move around them, however still tricky enough that you get caught on them if they manage to corner you. This was done intentionally to try and make players more afraid of getting too close to enemies, so that they'd be more likely to only do it in the situation when they need to try and distract enemies from going too close to the forge and try and bring them towards a hole. My apologies for the art that I used. I was running out of time, so I just used some black circles for placeholders, as well as just the white boxes like what I have for my death screen, in order to just act as placeholders and remind me that something needs to be added there and better art needs to be added when I work on the game full time. So this week I have added a proper art placeholder. It still needs to have a little bit of work on it. I'd prefer it to be a little more rounded than it is. However, for now, the art actually works and it looks like a proper hole. As for why the night cycle wasn't ending properly, I actually spent way longer than I should have trying to figure out what the problem was, and I never actually figured out what it was. At least not intentionally, because I'd accidentally already fixed the bug. After submitting my game for the game jams, I decided to do some more playtesting just to see how it was and if there were any more issues that I saw pop up after submission. While doing this, I found out that during the first night, I'd always have more enemies spawn than what I intended. So I went into the enemy spawner script and I made a couple of modifications as well as fixed a few problems with the coroutine that wasn't working properly or just wasn't being caught efficiently, I guess. and by doing this I also fixed the coroutine that was causing the day-night cycle to not switch over like it was supposed to. So I spent hours looking for something that I had already fixed. Thank you, commenter.
I love that you did one game for 4 jams at once with so many limitations. With how many restrictions you had on just one project, this is a cool little game. I like the game loop of placing holes for the enemies during the day and letting them fall in them at night. I do think it is a bit too easy to place all the holes around the forge and stand in them to let all of the enemies kill themselves.
Thank you very much for your support. What you're saying about players being able to put holes too close to the forge is extremely true, and it's not how I want players to play the game, as it just sucks all of the fun out of trying to outsmart the enemies in the game. So I have made it that you can't place holes too close to other holes, so you can't just spam them all into one area, as well as made it that there's an area around the forge that you can't dig. So instead, if an enemy gets too close to the forge, you have to dig and attract the enemy towards the hole, as opposed to putting holes directly in front of the forge. Other than the things that the commenters have brought up, I've also added a walking animation for the player so he's not constantly in an idle state. I've added more upgrades to the shop. I've added some temporary UI for the shop so it looks a little bit better but needs to be replaced. I've added some animation for the enemies. I've also added new UI for the action buttons. So now they're no longer just the plain white buttons, they now look a lot better, at least in my opinion, and I actually quite like them. Thank you all very much for watching this far into the video, and thank you for supporting what I'm working on. It does mean a lot to me. Hope you guys enjoy, and I hope you guys have fun playing games.